Hello, my name is Ulurotimi Osha. Today is May the 6th, 2026. We're still in Mental Health Awareness Month. And something I wanted to discuss was America's prison population. Of course, this heavily impacts mental health, being incarcerated, being unfree, being unable to enjoy the blessings of liberty like fellow Americans. This has an impact on mental health, especially in states like Maryland, in which um, the criminal justice system has corruptly, unethically linked incarceration with mental health, psychiatric delivery, right? Uh, the prison population uh, in America is coerced against their constitutional rights to be imprisoned in psychiatric institutions or coerced even in jail to take psychiatric psychotropics. That's psychiatric medication to take psychotropics, antipsychotic drugs, usually as an exchange to get free from jail, right? So it's a form of coercion that the Maryland courts, especially Montgomery County, Maryland, are notorious for. I've done videos and I'll further discuss how judges like Judge James Boniface, Judge Baby Berry, how they corruptly use crooked state psychologists like a Dr. Julie Smith to find um, to find defendants incompetent to stand trial to and then they try while they're in jail to coerce them to take antipsychotics. This is a constitutional right violation. But today what I wanted to discuss um, was the unusual suspects, right, in America's prisons, in America's jails, right? Um, of course, that's a play on words from the movie Usual Suspects. Usual Suspects. That was a great movie. It's the only movie that once I got to the end, I rewound it to the beginning and watched it all over again because in the beginning I was not paying attention. It seems to be moving slow, but you have to pay attention. So it's at the end that you see, um, you know, what's really going on. So it's about these characters who were imprisoned. They were in jail, not imprisoned, by the way. There's a difference between jail, being detained because you're a suspect, right, or you're a person of interest, right? There's a crime they're investigating, or you're about to be charged with a crime, or you've been charged with a crime. So you're in jail, you're detained. So if you're a public safety risk, or if you're a flight risk, so these men, the usual suspects, they had criminal records. That's why they're called usual suspects. They're the usual guys who are in and out of jail. So I'm talking about unusual suspects in jail that I found. That's people who had no prior criminal records. They had been, for all intents and purposes, they had been law abiding American citizens like myself. By the way, I should explain why I was jailed, right? So I wasn't jailed because I was convicted of a crime. I've not been convicted of a crime. I've never been convicted of a crime. It was my first time in jail. But I was found incompetent to stand trial, right, by Judge James Boniface. So incompetent is once you're found incompetent to stand trial, right? Um, that just means the judge thinks, well, you don't understand the charges against you. You don't understand the court proceedings, and you can't work with your lawyer. So he finds you incompetent to stand trial and suspends the case against you, right? And then he said, instead of the pattern, right, the system they have in Maryland is once you're found incompetent to stand trial, the judge sends you to a psychiatric hospital to go and receive treatment, right? To go and receive treatment so you can become competent. And then they do an evaluation, they find you competent to stand trial. So I've done videos in which I explained the fraud that occurred. The judge can ask you to go, out voluntarily to go in outside, the community. You don't have to go to a psychiatric hospital, and you can go and get treatment, see a psychiatrist or a psychologist on your own. Why you have to use a psychiatrist or a psychologist, it's bizarre, because what you're doing is the competency evaluation, they're typically just uh, educating you on the court proceedings. You would think that somebody who holds a Juris Doctor degree, a Doctor of Law degree, like I do from George Washington University Law School. I also did criminal law uh, at Bocconi University in Italy, in Milan. You'd think that I would understand courtroom proceedings, and I know how to work with a lawyer. In fact, I actually, in the court where I'm being charged, the court building, I worked there. I was a judicial intern to one of the respected judges, Judge John Maloney, right? While I was in law school in 2019. So it's kind of it's all funny, but anyway. So the criminal justice system is corrupt and it's discriminatory, particularly about against Black people. So I was saying that um, today I'm discussing the criminal justice system, the incarceration in America. America has the most incarcerated population in the world, the most incarcerated population in the world. Um, it's an oxymoron that the land of the free is the land of the most unfree people, right? The most unfree people in the world. So America is only 5% of the global population, but we hold 20% of the world's imprisoned people, 20%, right? We're just a fifth of China, fifth of the population of India, that's considered a developing nation, but we have more incarcerated people than they do, right? Um, in any event, so I was saying, explaining why I've been to jail. So I was found incompetent to stand trial. So the judge can ask you to volunteer, right, and go and see a psychiatrist on your own in the community, right, instead of going to a state psychiatrist. But I refused, right? I refused. That's my right because I said this was fraud. They committed fraud, especially since my aunt's a psychiatrist. My family have been telling the judge, no, I don't have a mental illness, so there's no reason for me to go and see a psychiatrist. I don't have a mental illness. Why are you asking me to go and see a psychiatrist? And I have a law degree. This is fraud. They're committing fraud on the court. So when the judge finds you incompetent to stand trial and decides he's going to send you to a state psychiatrist, he's going to force you, right, against your rights to go to a state psychiatrist, you go through jail first of all because you're waiting for them to open up a bed in a behavioral health hospital, a mental health hospital, or psychiatric hospital, or any hospital, right, that has a psych ward, right? So you're waiting. That's a state hospital, right? You're waiting for a bed to open up. So that's why I've passed through jail. So they detain me in jail, right? Unfortunately, it takes a lengthy period. They can detain you as much as 4 months, 5 months. I think he found me incompetent to stand trial twice. So the last time, I was detained there in jail for about 5 months. So I've spent 15 months wrongfully detained. I've done 1 year under house arrest wearing a GPS. So while in jail, there are people, as I said, unusual suspects, people you don't expect to be in jail that you find there. I found, um, I talked about the hospital I went to. I've, I've discussed two women, right? Beautiful Black American women, lovely Black American women, both college educated. One of them had an MBA in her 40s, right? She already had kids. In her 40s, she served in the military, right? Served in Air Force in the military. She worked for the U.S. Department of Treasury, had an MBA, well spoken, everything. All those. What is it? Is a clean, polished person, right? Articulate, everything, smart. But she told me her story. She was locked in jail for 1 year. Her public defender thought she was incompetent to stand trial. Her white public defender. Black women are, especially when they're educated, they're proud and they want their dignity, their respect. So she said they filed false charges against her, right? They claimed she assaulted someone. By the way, she was acquitted because I followed up on her case after. This woman was acquitted, but she had been she was found not guilty, but she'd been held in jail for 1 year. She says she never saw a judge, and then they transferred her to a hospital. where she said she was not going to take any medication. She said she's not mentally ill, but the judge, she unfortunately she had a bad psychiatrist, a psychiatrist she didn't like. Under the law, you're entitled to see anybody, but once they take you to a state hospital, they force a psychiatrist on you. That psychiatrist who might not like her, she was a black woman. The psychiatrist was a Chinese woman. They didn't get along. That person accused her of having a mental illness and ordered that she should use medication. She went to a judge. The judge approved it. So the woman was filing petitions on her own, but she was not successful. The judge ordered that they should force medicate her. And so they were putting her in a chair. They would, restrain her, right, in a chair several times consistently, day after day. And she was resisting. She said it's a violent procedure, that the drugs, that's where they inject you, it's a violent procedure. She said if she kept resisting, they would kill her. So it's a violation of our human rights. It was a violation of her human rights. It's a brutal violation. This, it's barbaric. The state of Maryland is barbaric. They have corrupt and barbaric judges, and like Judge James Bonifant, Judge BBM Berry, and they're doing it from kickbacks that they receive from these hospitals, right? Judge Bonifant is on the board, or was on the board of MedStar Hospital, right? MedStar Hospital is a hospital that I filed a complaint against, right, for malpractice. So it's kind of bizarre. But anyway, I wanted to talk about other people, the unusual suspects. There was another young woman. She was a model. She'd been a model. Beautiful. You can see, once you see her, okay, this is a model. Beautiful black woman, well spoken, spoke with a British accent. A New Yorker. She had a problem with her baby daddy, who was a white man. This person's baby daddy she said, was a millionaire, old enough to be her grandfather. She had a restraining order against her. America is where the society where people take weed. Weed is legal in Maryland. She was high. She was upset. She said she'd report that this guy had beaten her up, her baby daddy or whatever, her baby daddy, right? He'd beaten her up, bust her lips. She said the cops were on his side. She got a restraining order. She got upset. She vandalized his stuff. The cops arrested her. So her life's pretty much, it's very unfortunate. But she was raped while she was in detention. She was raped while she was in detention by correctional officers. They drug you in jail. She was drugged and she was raped. She said two correctional officers came into her cell at night and raped her while she was drugged. So this is what they do. This is amongst the violations. But in any event, what I wanted to talk about basically is the other people that I saw while detained that you'd never expect. Um, Unfortunately, America incarcerates its people at an alarming rate. For black men, it's on a national level. Black men are 5 to 7.5 times on average to be incarcerated for the same offenses as white men. In some states, it's as high as, like California, it's as high as um, 9 times. In New Jersey as well, in Maine, it's about 9 times. Blacks are 9 times more likely to be incarcerated for the same offenses than whites, right? In Minnesota as well, it's 20 times, right? In some states, it's 20 times the rates, right? So for the same offense, for instance, I met a guy detained, a white guy. We actually became friends. After that, we were friends while there. I met him at the hospital, right? So I was taken to a rehabilitation hospital, and so a mild hospital, right? So um, this guy was a white guy. Actually, comes from his parents are millionaires. Both. Um, Let me not give the details, but actually, both his parents are NSA, and he explained to me why he was eat. Right, he was petitioned by his parents. When he was 20, they said he didn't have a mental illness, that he'd used drugs. So that's one of the difficulties as well, right? Young people taking drugs, right? They will manifest symptoms of, that are congruent with mental illness symptoms, right? Like hallucination, right? If you take LSD, ecstasy, all these things, right? They will, have symptoms, demonstrate symptoms that are consistent with what would people would interpret as a mental illness symptoms, right? So he said he'd gone for a rave, and his parents thought he was acting out, and so he was EAPed. He was emergency petitioned, like Jide Wariri, the Howard University professor, emergency petitioned me in my home. But he was sent to a hospital. He was not locked up in jail. He was not imprisoned. He was not assaulted by police like I was. So he explained the first time he was petitioned. Well, he said less than 5 cops came to his home. It doesn't take that many. So the first time I'm petitioned as a middle-aged man in my own home, independent, right, fabricated by cops, I get shot at. That's the scarring. I'm tasered multiple times. I'm tear gassed in my home. I'm removed naked, bloodied up in handcuffs. My jaw, I would need to see a video of what they did to me right after, because my jaw, my whole body was in pain when I woke up the next morning. So, and then I was locked up in jail because when I refused to enter the hospital, it's my right. When I refused to have any evaluation, because I knew what was going on. I said, I'm not having any evaluation. So they locked me up instead and fabricated charges against me. Jide Wariri would tell my pastor, who's actually a psychologist, was a lecturer, professor of psychology before he came to America. At one time, he was a professor of psychologist. He's still he's a psychologist. So he admitted, Jidewari admitted to this pastor, told him that him and the police fabricated charges against me because they knew I would not willingly, uh, yield to treatment. So he wanted to force treatment for an illness I don't have. So Iwari was telling this man that I have an illness I don't have, right? So they filed false charges, imprisoned me, dehumanized me, removed me naked from my home, recorded me, right? Video voyeurism, which is a crime. It violates 18 USC section 1801. So they did all these dehumanizing things to try and force me to take treatment for an illness I don't have. The state has admitted now that I don't have a mental illness. They never treated me. It's been 3 years, but they still have the false charges against me. So you see the disparity, right, in the treatment. Now, um, as I said, on national average, black men are 5 to 7.5 times more likely to be incarcerated than white men. And of course, amongst the things that exacerbated this was America's war on drugs, and of course, Clinton's crime bill with the 3 strikes and you're out. For drug offenses, I think if you've had 3 drug offenses, you get incarcerated and things like that. So it impacted black men at a more disproportionate rate. The crime bill of Bill Clinton affected black men 8 to 12 times worse, leading to their incarceration. Um, so interestingly, while detained, I met. Um, there was a guy that I met. He was actually a lawyer, an Indian lawyer. When you see him, despite the fact that he's in jail clothes, so Montgomery County puts you in these green jail clothes immediately as you're arrested. Um, he was, you could see his demeanor reserved, wears glasses, an Indian guy born in America, but he was actually a practicing attorney, right? By the way, as I always say, this is what I'm discussing. None of it constitutes legal advice. And I always say I'm a lawyer, not an attorney. No matter how many times I say it in America, they're just people who will never get it, right? That all attorneys are lawyers, but not all lawyers are attorneys, right? An attorney is somebody who is licensed. They've taken the bar exam and they're licensed. They've been sworn into a court and they're licensed to practice law, to have a client, right? To take a client for free. That's the difference, right? But a lawyer, you have a JD, a Juris Doctor. You're trained in the law. You've graduated in law, but you're not licensed. You've not been called to a bar. And if you've been called to a bar of one state, right? For instance, if you're an attorney in Maryland, you've been called to the bar in Maryland, you cannot go to New York and say you're an attorney, right? You can be disbarred. You go even be criminally prosecuted. You have to apply to be an attorney in New York as well, or whatever state. So all attorneys are lawyers, not all lawyers are attorneys. So I'm a lawyer, but this guy was an attorney, practicing attorney in Maryland, but he was incarcerated. I didn't get to know that he was an attorney until the day he was leaving. He had been locked up for almost three months, right? And he was glad to be leaving. There was a guy that I met. We were detained together, right? Like one of the first. There were three first times that I was detained because this judge locked me up three different occasions. I was locked up three different times. You know, so for the same event, for the same incident, and for the same reason, they were trying to coerce me to go and do an evaluation and take treatment. And I said, no, that's not going to happen. So they go, he forces you, says, well, he's committing you to a state hospital, but you have to go through the jail because you're going to be held in jail until a state hospital opens up a bed and they send you there, right? So that's what happens in Montgomery County. So in the meantime, you're interacting with criminals, but some people are not criminals. I had this cellmate. I saw him in detention. His clothes were all dressed up in Gucci, everything. He was loaded, smelling, cologne, everything. And he told me why he was locked up, and it's happening in Maryland. So he owned a restaurant. I actually gone to a chain of restaurants, a Spanish restaurant. He's a Spanish guy, and he was so pissed off, and but he didn't know. So a successful businessman, he he had a speeding ticket. He said he never received it. So that's you can imagine people going to jail for speeding tickets in Maryland. He had a speeding ticket. It had accumulated. He didn't. He said he never received it. So if you don't pay your speeding ticket, they can take you to. They could call you, make it a court issue or whatever. So he said he didn't know. So he explained what happened to me though. So he said while he was in court that the judge was very rude and dismissive to him and everything, and he said, God, he said he'd never been to court before. So Spanish guy, and then he said he just told the court that hey, he respects the judge, that he would appreciate it if the judge talks to him like he's an adult. He said the judge told him for that you're going to jail, and that's how he ended up in jail. He did spend just one night. His son came to pick him up, right? His family came, his wife and son, they came to pick him up, right? And there's some of these people, they gave me their contacts for some reason, and I kept up, and so very unusual reason. There was another guy who actually owned a restaurant as well. This guy was Ethiopian. He was also a bank executive, and his story is so sad. In fact, when you see him, you know he's not meant to be in jail. There are just some people you see them, and very mild, but he was locked up for about 7 months. And he got adjusted. You can imagine adjusting to people, to criminals, because yes, it's detention. It's not prison, right? It's pre-trial detention. They're holding you pending your trial. That's why people are there. But many people who are going to end up going to prison, you're going to interact with them. Those are the people that are normally detained in jail, right? They're people who are in and out, right? They've done time in prison. So they're repeat offenders. That's a problem in America, right? America does not focus on rehabilitation, right? It's very punitive, unlike other nations. That's why, we have this bloated prison population, right? Because of the orientation of American sentencing, right? I talked about Bill Clinton's three strikes and you're out. There was something else that uh, you know uh, led to the bloating of America's prisons, and especially with the disproportionate incarceration of black men. Bill Clinton's welfare reform, in which single mothers who were receiving welfare from the government now had to give like DNA, the paternity test or whatever, paternity records to show who the father of the child is, and the government goes again after them, right? The government will lock you up, revoke your passport so you can't run away anywhere, and lock you up for not paying child support. So you see, that's another reason there are many black men in jail. I saw them. Many reasons black men are locked up. Yes, you should take care of your kids, but man, criminalizing and destroying somebody's life for not paying child support. There are many people who don't pay child support, whites. I know a white woman who refuses, she pays it up for her husband because she says she doesn't want her kids to um, to see their father as a criminal. In fact, while I was in court, there was a woman who had a paternity custody battle with her husband. She was a white woman. And the judge was saying he wanted to put a GPS on the husband to implement a protective order. And she said no. She didn't want, even though she didn't want him around her, she said she doesn't want her kids, her sons, to see their father as a criminal, that she doesn't want it to have an adverse effect on them later on. So these are white women that I've observed. These are concerns they've expressed, regarding the relationship of their child with their father, in the future, how they would view their father. And so they didn't want custody battles to criminalize welfare, paternity, child support. They didn't want it to criminalize the father of their kids, right? So unfortunately, these are ways that the American system, right, criminal justice system, they've brought paternity and made it a criminal matter, and that's one of the things that bloats up the prison system and leads to the disproportionate incarceration of black men. So, in any event, there was this black guy. He was an Ethiopian guy. He was actually German Ethiopian, born in Germany. He spoke many different languages, right? Many different languages. He was a brilliant guy. He's actually a bank. He was a bank executive. So he had a domestic issue with his wife, right? A domestic issue, and uh, so the cops were called, and then something happened in which his in-laws, his wife's brother, who had been his friend, he thought he was his friend, went to lie to the police that well, the guy wanted to shoot her, that he asked him to get a gun to shoot her, to shoot the wife, which was a lie. Apparently the guy had he had a gun. He'd gone to a shooting range with the brother-in-law, and he left his gun with his brother-in-law. When the cops came after he had this domestic spat with his wife, when the cops came, they asked him if he had a gun. So he said, yes, he owns a gun, but it's not in the house. He said it's with his brother-in-law. So he said he called his brother-in-law and asked him to bring the gun. That was what he was asking for, to bring the gun over to give it to the cop, because the cops asked for it. But they now lied, and so they charged him with very serious crimes, right? And meanwhile, while he was locked up in jail, because he and I became friends. We actually exchanged. We've been in touch since then. Um, he now told me how they were now trying to extort money from him and his house. They now told him that okay, that because the wife was now the one who was now tearing up and breaking down because because she loved her husband was locked up. But the in-laws were now trying to extort him, asking that he should write a letter, a will to give up his house to them, to the wife, to give the wife everything, and that's when they're gonna help get him out of jail. He had a private attorney, got a private attorney, by because they were semi-illiterate or something, or they didn't know American laws, so they're trying to blackmail him and everything. Uh, anyway, he lost his job as an executive, and he expressed his disappointment in America, right? And America, just something little destroys their lives. There was this black guy though who was lucky. Where was he from? I forgot. He was a black guy. I think he was from Senegal. He was a software engineer, made six figures, like 300 grand, everything. Had a nice house, mansion, everything. He was in for fraud, but the judge he had was kind with him, right? Um, he didn't do fraud. He started a company. He was trading stocks on the side. He started without registering with the SEC. He wasn't a stockbroker. He wasn't licensed. I've been a stockbroker before. So he was found guilty, right, of and so someone who had traded on his behalf was this Indian woman who was his friend, and he talked about how she forced him, to be trading stocks on his behalf, right? And you have to be very careful. So he wasn't. He used to trade on his own initially by himself. He was a day trader, just trading, had his own account. So this person gave him money to trade on her behalf. Initially, he made her money 100,000. Eventually, she lost money about 200,000, and then somehow he was reported. It was a dispute between both of them. Then eventually, the SEC found him paid a lot of money, over 300,000, but he was a software engineer with a big company, Fortune 50 company. He said the judge, right? So I met him in detention. So instead of him going to actual prison, he was convicted, but they let him go through what's called a halfway home. And the judge helped him keep his actual job, right? The judge said, no, he's too brilliant. He doesn't want him to lose his job. Unlike crooked Judge James Bonifant, who said he wanted me to lose my job, right? He was a white judge. That's Judge James Bonifant. I had a job, six-figure job at the Pentagon. They filed false charges against me, right? And he wanted me to lose my job. And I lost my job, but that's no big deal. Um, Six-figure job. My attorneys asked him, no, that look, let this guy go back to work. It will be good for his mental health, because the judge was lying about my mental health. I have no mental illness. I wasn't struggling with my mental health, but the judge made me lose my job. So all these, usual suspects. The good thing, the interesting thing is that the black people or the Indian, the people I met, they were very strong mentally. People who had never been to jail, who were actually law-abiding people, responsible professionals, and some freak of nature, some accident led them to jail. Right? They were strong. They reacted positively. Right? They had a positive outlook. They never broke down. They didn't break down in jail. It didn't destroy them. Unlike there was one instance, right, while I was detained between December 2024, between November 2024 and January 2025, there was a white guy who had a PhD, right? He'd actually been friends with my cellmate. I had a cellmate, and he was from Nicaragua. Another time, I'm going to do another video just talking about the issue of the government saying, well, that immigrants are criminals. Are there people who are criminals? My cellmate, I had a cellmate who told me he'd been to prison in his own country, and like fantasize. He used to express, how Americans jail was far better than prisons in his home country where he came from. I asked him, "Have you been to prison back home?" He said, "Yes, many times." So yes, there might be some criminals who do cross the border, right, as they say. Um, but there was this instance of this guy who had a PhD. So my cellmate had been friends with this white guy who had a PhD, right? And he worked at the National Institutes of Health. When they moved him to another unit, he'd been in my unit, but they moved him to another unit. He, and that's why people, because people around in my unit liked him, so they thought maybe moving to another unit where he wasn't friends with people or something. That's probably what led to his depression. But one day he got his blanket, his blanket, right, and wrapped it around his neck, and he wrapped it around the banister on the second floor, and he jumped. He committed suicide, and nobody helped him. So that's how he died. So there were about at least 4 suicides while I was there, being wrongfully detained. So people will react to incarceration in different ways, right? So, but America is doing a disservice to its people, and by running these for-profit prisons, it's making a business out of it. And there are many crooked cops, like in Montgomery County, who files false charges, who fabricate evidence against people, lengthy detentions. I haven't had a trial. It's 3 years. The police had no arrest warrant. In my case, came to my home, assaulted me. They came ostensibly for a fabricated, perjured emergency evaluation petition. I was the one who was injured. It's against the law. The police who attacked me and assaulted me filed false charges that I had assaulted them. Till today, my attorneys haven't seen the assault I committed. I was the one who was the victim of a crime. But the state attorney filed this malicious prosecution, bad faith prosecution. The objective is to prevent me from being able to sue the state, right, for wrongful arrest and for excessive disproportionate force and battery by assault by Montgomery County Police. Um, in any event, this video has gotten long. I'll continue in another video on the unusual suspects in jail. My name is Oloro Tinyosha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.